of the ground, bada bing, bada boom. Yisro knew that Moshe was very special, that he was able to liberate this staff that was a very powerful staff made of sapphire, very special, and it was very heavy. And he was able to carry it like it was nothing. So the staff belonged to Moshe because he was going to be the redeemer of Israel, chosen by God. All right, so the dynamic duo. As instructed, Moshe meets Aaron at Har Sinai and tells him what God has said. Aaron shows little of his brother's trepidations and readily signs on. So, upon reaching Egypt, they address the elders of the people and inform them of God's intentions. After Moshe shows his credentials by demonstrating the miracles that God empowered him with, the Israelites affirm their belief that God is indeed responding to their outcry for deliverance and prostrate themselves to worship the Lord. And that's in Shemot 4:29 through 31. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to go forward. Is there anybody who would like to read this slide?
Dynamic duo, Moshe and Aaron before Pharaoh. They asked him the Israelites to Egypt and worship their God in the This demand doesn't sit well with Pharaoh. As a result, he imposes even harsher decrees, specifically they now have to produce the same number of bricks, but they will no longer be given straw to help fashion them. This is tantamount to being asked to make veggies without water. The taskmaster mercilessly whipped the Hebrew women because they are unable to perform this impossible feat. The Israelites, finding no sympathy from Pharaoh, turn against Moshe and Aaron for having made a bad situation even worse. God bids the crestfallen Moshe to stick to the plan, assuring him that Pharaoh will eventually relent and be forced to let the Israelites go.
Thank you. I appreciate you reading. Excellent. So, with their spirits crushed, the Israelites refuse to listen to Moshe as he reveals God's message. Moshe, in turn, questions how could he convince Paro if he couldn't even convince his own people? God again reassures him that Aaron will be his spokesman. All right, so we have 10 plagues. And I've got them listed here. So we're going to talk about this. Moshe and Aaron again face off with Paro, anticipating that Paro will be impressed by such wonders. Aaron casts down his rod. Sure enough, it transforms into a serpent. But the Egyptian magicians easily duplicate the feat. Although Aaron's serpent turns back to a rod and proceeds to swallow all the magician's rods, Paro is still unmoved and unfazed. However, Paro won't remain recalcitrant very long. He's in for a very unpleasant surprise in the form of 10 nasty plagues, each of which lasts 7 days. So we have the plague of blood. After warning Paro, Aaron followed Moshe's instructions and waved his staff over the Nile. The result was blood in place of all the water. It killed the fish and caused an unbearable stench throughout the land. The Egyptians begged the Israelites, whose water supply was unaffected, for water. And when the Egyptian sorcerers duplicated it, Paro wasn't impressed and remained obstinate. The plague of frogs. For this plague, Aaron stretched out his hand over the Nile, and frogs swarmed the land. Paro begged Moshe to stop the plague and promised to let the Jews leave. As soon as Moshe accommodated, Paro renegotiated on his promise. Plague of lice. Aaron drove his trusty staff into the dust and kicked up lice that swarmed all over the Egyptians and their cattle. The Egyptian magicians could not duplicate the feat and were forced to admit that the God of Israel possessed superior powers. Paro, however, still didn't budge. The plague of wild animals. Moshe warned Paro that the Egyptians' homes would be invaded by wild animals if he didn't relent. And after the ensuing devastation of the land, Paro agreed to let the Jews bring sacrifices to God within the borders of Egypt. Moshe, however, insisted they be allowed to remove themselves from the defilement and decadence of Egypt by traveling into the wilderness for 3 days to bring such sacrifices. Paro initially agreed but recanted when the plagues stopped. Now we have the plague of cattle. After Paro again failed to heed Moshe's warning, the Egyptian cattle were stricken with disease again. Paro didn't budge. The plague of boils. In Paro's presence, Moshe sprinkled ashes toward the skies, and the ashes turned into dust and then into boils on the Egyptian people and their animals, and Paro still didn't relent. The plague of hail. Following a familiar pattern of warning and deliverance of the promised plague, a torrent of hail hit the Egyptian people, crops, and cattle. These weren't ordinary hailstones. God combined ice and fire in a miraculous harmony of opposites. Paro at first acknowledged his folly, but when the hail ceased, he became the same old stubborn mule of a man. There's a whole story we can talk about the ice and fire being related to the word Shemaim, um, heaven, because water and the ice, and which is the mime, and the Aish of fire and making peace in heaven and earth. So there's there's a level there to be examined at another date. The plague of locusts. Moshe warned that a plague of locusts would descend upon the Egyptian crops. Paro's advisors urged him to let the Jewish males leave. Moshe and Aaron weren't looking for compromise and insisted that all the Jewish people and their flocks be allowed to leave. Paro drove Moshe and Aaron from his presence. The next day, Moshe extended his rod, and a swarm of locusts descended and devoured the Egyptian vegetation. After Moshe stopped the plague, Paro remained obstinate. The plague of darkness. The next plague enveloped the Egyptians in darkness for 6 days. During the last three, they couldn't move about at all, while the Israelites were given light in all their inhabitations. And Paro again drove Moshe and Aaron from his presence. Again, during this plague, there was a lot of things happening amongst the Jewish people, and Chazal teach us. And those are layers we can examine at another time. The plague of death of the firstborn. Moshe warned there would be one last plague that would kill all Egyptian firstborn, including Paro's own son, and departed for the last time. At midnight, God smote the Egyptian firstborn people and animals. Paro and his family and his fellow Egyptians arose in the middle of the night, lamented their loss, and finally begged the Israelites to leave. When God informed Moshe that redemption was at hand, he commanded that on the 10th of the Jewish month of Nisan, which is in the spring, the head of each household should set aside an unblemished young male lamb. The evening of the 14th of Nisan, the lamb would be sacrificed, and some of its blood would be spread on the doorpost of the home, symbolizing that its inhabitants were Jewish. That night, the meat of the sacrifice would be roasted and eaten with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Any remains would be burnt in the morning. This meal was to be consumed in haste, and the Jews were to be ready to begin their journey. For that night, God would smite the Egyptian firstborn, but spare those homes whose doorposts were sprinkled with blood. God further commanded that Pesach, or Passover, be observed annually as a permanent reminder of the liberation from Egypt. Only unleavened bread would be eaten for 7 days, and the first and seventh days of Pesach were to be days of celebration on which all work was forbidden. Israelites leave Egypt. Approximately 2.5 million men, women, and children left Egypt, saddled with donkeys and camels. They were laden with tremendous wealth of gold and silver that the Egyptian had given them in fulfillment of a promise God made to their forefather Abraham 400 years earlier. That's in Bereshit 15:14. They left in such haste that their leavened bread didn't have time to rise. This is the main reason that Jews eat matzah, or unleavened bread, on Pesach. So when the Jews left Egypt, God had to lead them toward the land of Israel via a circuitous route, and he wished to avoid taking them through the land of the hostile Philistines, um, which is Gaza, by the way. Lest the nation or this new nation of Israel, this young nation of Israel, would encounter war-hardened armies there and desire to return to Egypt. So fascinating, isn't it? We're still having this problem with this area. So, is there somebody who would like to read this slide? Oh, I don't think you're for some reason your mic is off. Oh, okay. I can't hear you. So I'll go ahead and read since we can't hear. But thank you. So the Israelites were led by a miraculous pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Moshe performed a kindness for his ancestor Joseph and brought his remains to the land of Israel for burial. The Israelites arrived at Etam on the wilderness edge and were commanded to turn back and camp by the Red Sea, which is really the Yom Suf. God maneuvered them around in such a fashion as a ploy to entice Paro to pursue them, with the thought that they were confounded or lost in the wilderness. God reassured the Israelites that he would protect them and deliver them. Okay, so next we are going into our third points, and which is the salvation of a nation. And this has got the Parsha of Beshlach. We'll be talking about the splitting of the Yom Suf, the Parsha of Yithro. We're going to talk about Moshe in the mountain, the Ten Commandments, and then how to build a tabernacle, covers Teruma, Tetzave, as well as the last two parshiot of Shmo, which is Vayachel and Pekude. And then in Kitasa, we will talk about the sin of the golden calf. Moving forward, the splitting of the Yom Suf. So Paro regretted letting the Jews leave and assembled his entire army to pursue them. When they were breathing down the Israelites' backs, the Jews panicked and complained bitterly to Moshe, saying, "It would have been better for us to serve in Egypt than we die in the wilderness." However, Moshe assured them that God would again save them, and the pillar of cloud moved to the rear, creating a buffer of darkness that stalled the Egyptian advance. Moshe then stretched his hand over the Yom Suf and divided the waters, allowing the Jews to cross on dry land. And just a little side note on this, the waters actually split into 12 sections. So each tribe walked in their own lane, and it was Nakshav ben Aminadab, not right? Is that how you say Nakshav ben Aminadab? He is the one from Yehuda who led and went in first until the waters were up to his neck, and then they split. So it was like his Amuna Shalema. Oftentimes it takes an act of Amuna Shalema, but Hashem is to do the miracle, the nace, but not always. In this instance, it was a combination of um, that act and Moshe. The maniacal Paro and his hordes attempted to follow them, but were thrown into confusion by God, who caused their chariot wheels to become stuck in the wet sand. Moshe then stretched out his hand again over the sea, and the waters turned to their original place, drowning the Egyptians in the process. Upon witnessing this miracle, the Jews sang a song praising God for his infinite power and guidance in destroying their enemy and leading his people to their destiny. And we still sing this song every day, every morning. I sung it this morning. Beautiful. Okay, so the remaining part of Parshas Bishlach relates the following events. So we have we're going to move quickly through this. The Waters of Morah. The Jews continued their journey reaching Morah, or bitterness, so named because of its bitter waters. And the people became thirsty and murmured against Moshe, who was shown a branch from a species of tree, which then thrown into the waters made them sweet. We have man from heaven, or manna from heaven. 1 month after leaving Egypt, the Jews entered the wilderness of Sinai. Soon their lack of food made them wish they had died amidst the luxuries in Egypt, and God made it known that he would cause bread to rain from heaven and would test whether the Jews obeyed his Torah. So in the evening, quails came to the camp, providing the Jews with meat, and in the morning, the ground was covered with man. The Jews were commanded to gather no more than an omer, approximately 4 pints of man per day. However, on the sixth day, they were told to gather a double portion so that they would have man on Shabbat, when work, including gathering, was prohibited. Manna, or man in Hebrew, was the bread from heaven, aka the food of angels, or also known as the food of angels, that God miraculously sent to sustain the Israelites during their 40-year sojourn in the wilderness. Okay, now we have another complaint about a lack of water at a place called Rephidim, and the people again complained to Moshe about the lack of water. At God's command, Moshe struck a rock on nearby Har Sinai with his staff. Rivulets of water gushed forth, and the people drank to their heart's content. So this parsha that we're talking about, Bishlach, is going to conclude with the attack by the tribe of Amalek. The tribe of Amalek are the descendants of Esav, and they attacked the Israelites at Rephidim, and the Jews, led by Yehoshua, fought back. Although the war escalated, Moshe went to the top of the hill holding his staff. And when he would raise his hands and prayer to God, the Jews would prevail, and the battle lasted until sunset, when Amalek was decisively defeated. And we have a mitzvah to eradicate Amalek. All right. Moshe in the mountain. So on the first day of the month of Sivan, late May into June, just 45 days after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrived in the Sinai wilderness and made their camp in the front of a mountain. Moshe made an initial ascent on the mountain. As he did, he heard God's voice instructing him to remind the Jews how he delivered them from Egypt, and that if they obeyed him, they would be transformed into a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And this is where we get into the Jews being a kingdom of priests. They are the light to the nations. And this comes from their inheritance that they got, that Yaakov got from Yitzhak. And why they have this right to be the kingdom of priests, the priesthood. So Moshe descended from Har Sinai and repeated God's exhortation to the elders and people, to which the people responded in unison, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." This is in Shemot 19:8. So Moshe then reported these words back to God, not that he didn't already hear them. And God told Moshe that he would appear in a thick cloud and speak to him before the entire assembly of Jews, so that his divine mission would never be second guessed. So God's speaking to Moshe before the entire assembly of Jews distinguishes Judaism from the two other major religions, Christianity and Islam. The latter are based on the testimony of an individual or small group of people who proclaim a revelation of divine instruction. Well, the entire nation of Israel, by contrast, was told to prepare for 3 days to receive the Torah and personally experience this revelation. So the 10 Commandments are found in the Parshas of Yitro, the Parshat of Yitro. I'm mixing Ashkenazi and Sephardi. On the sixth day of Sivan, thunder and lightning erupted, and a cloud descended over Har Sinai. The sound of the trumpet permeated the rarefied air, and Moshe brought the Jews to the foot of Har Sinai. God then called Moshe up to its summit. Instructed by God, Moshe told the Jews not to gaze upon his manifestation. Then God began the 10 Devarim, or utterances. The people heard the first two, and their souls fled them. After restored, they bid Moshe to ascend alone, and because they're like, we're going to die if he keeps on. Their souls had literally left their bodies. And they bid Moshe to ascend alone and receive the remaining commandments. "I am the Lord your God, who delivered you from Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal or kidnap. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his house, his servant, ox, donkey, or any of his possessions." So the 10 Commandments are divided into two categories. The first category comprises the 5 laws between man and God, and the second category has 5 related to the laws between man and man. Why is honoring one's parents in the first five? Well, the sages had three plausible explanations. First, the Talmud teaches that whoever honors his parents honors God because it indicates a willingness to accept authority and to carry on the tradition. Second, respect for them is part of one's obligation to God. And finally, respect for one's parents is a cornerstone of faith in the entire Torah for Jewish tradition is based on the chain from Abraham to Sinai and beyond. This is a chain in which the links are successive generations of parents and children. The people were so struck with fear by what they had witnessed that they withdrew after the second commandment and pleaded with Moshe to speak to God in their place lest they die. Moshe then drew near to the thick darkness and received a series of laws, 600 of them to be exact, over the following 40 days and nights. And I chose to have the luchos here in as sapphire cubes because indeed they were sapphire cubes that Hashem carved from the throne. The Kisei HaKavod, Hashem's throne, is made from sapphire, and so the first luchos that Moshe ended up breaking, I think I'm giving it away, but they were made from sapphire. The second set, Moshe would have to go carve sapphire cubes himself from a sapphire mine. Um, but I just thought that was interesting. So we have a sapphire staff, sapphire cube, sapphire kisei kavod. So sapphire is like my favorite stone. All right. Mishpatim. All right, this is a heavy text slide. I'll go ahead and read it. Parshas Mishpatim contains dozens of civil laws that include torts or personal injury and property damage. The juxtaposition of the portion dealing primarily with civil and tort law with the Ten Commandments provides an astounding insight into Judaism. The Torah doesn't recognize a distinction between church and state, right? So, to the contrary, all areas of life are interwoven. Holiness is a state of being that imitates from correct business dealings as well as piety in ritual matters. So in Judaism, the concept of the temple is in the courtroom or in any room for that matter, be it in the home, in the office, or in the synagogue. So the following is just a sample of some of the laws that God imparted on Moshe during his time on the mountain. If one injures another during a fight, he's liable for his loss of earning, medical expenses and pain, embarrassment, and physical injury. If during a fight one accidentally strikes a pregnant woman, God forbid, and causes her to miscarry, one is liable for damages. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which, although commonly misinterpreted, always means the monetary value of an eye, and so on. So, if the owner of a dangerous animal fails to take proper precautions and the animal kills a person, the animal is killed and the owner is punished. If an animal kills a non Jewish slave, the slave's owner is given 30 shekels of silver. The civil laws covered in the book of Shmo are so many and so detailed that it is not within the scope of this guide to discuss them all or to go into any great detail. Here are a few of them. Just to give you an idea, a stranger, actually it's referring to a convert here, they're called a ger, often translated as stranger, isn't to be wronged or insulted in any way. Similar consideration must be shown to widows and orphans. Loans between Jews must be interest free. If one takes a garment that is used as a blanket at night for a pledge, he must return the garment to its owner before sunset. One must extend a helping hand to a fellow Jew, even if there is a rivalry between them. If one comes upon a rival's lost animal, he must return it to its original owner. Similarly, if one finds an animal lying helplessly under its burden, one should assist it. The first fruits and produce of a land and vineyards must be offered to God. Similarly, the firstborn of men and animals are to be dedicated to God. Hence the laws of the Bechor. All right, so we have miscellaneous laws are also included in this section, included by the following: the prohibition against eating treifa, the meat of an animal torn by beasts in the field, the Shemitah, or the seventh sabbatical year during which the land is to lie fallow, and I've actually lived in Israel during the Shemitah, and we do observe those laws. This and we actually had to buy my husband. We had to buy. He had never. I mean, I think he had when he was in yeshiva, but it had been many years since he had lived in the land of Israel, and had to buy halacha books relating to Shemitah to know how to conduct ourselves during the Shemitah year in the land of Israel. It's only observed in Israel and not outside of Israel. So, and the land is to lie fallow. So, this allows rejuvenation of the soil and provides an additional benefit. The owner is freed of the field, is freed from working the field, and can direct his energies to spiritual pursuits. So, the complete absentation from work, there's no work to be done on the Shabbos, on the Shabbat. The pilgrimage to Israel on the 3 festivals are included here: the festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Sukkot is often known also by some people as the Feast of Tabernacles. The prohibition against cooking a kid goat in its mother's milk. This actually applies to any species of kosher mammal and kosher milk. God's concluding message here is this: